everyone. In just a minute, I'm going to be introducing author Brendan Mathews, and we're going to be talking about his debut novel called The World of Tomorrow. This book came out in the beginning of September, so it's been out for 3 months, and it is getting rave reviews, and there is a very good reason why, because it is an amazing book. Anyway, it's 560 pages, and I don't like reading 500-page books, but this book was worth every page. He is an amazing storyteller. I'm going to tell you all about it when I talk to him, but just so you know, it is one book that if you want to invest your time in a great novel, this is the one to do it. So let's get started and talk to Brendan. Hi, everyone. I am so excited today to be speaking with author Brendan Mathews and his brand new debut novel, The World of Tomorrow. And he has the copy of the book to show the great cover. Look at that cover.
Here?
Yes, perfect. Thank you
Great
so
cover,
much.
and
Yeah. Oh, wow. And that's what you don't get to see if you don't have the physical copy. I was listening to the audio, reading it on my Kindle, going back and forth, and I am so happy to get to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I just want to tell you a little insight to my life. I do nothing but read, okay? Because I do these interviews all the time, right? So I came across your book. I don't even know how. People recommend books to me. I find them on Facebook, on social media. So anyway, 500 plus page book. I'm thinking, I don't have time. I just don't have time. I don't have time for this, right? And just so you know, I never read anything about the book. People recommend them or they come up as a, you should read this. Okay. And I never want to hear what anyone has to say. I want my own, because I read a lot of books, right? So I'm laying in bed and I'm reading your book and I was like, oh my God. And my boyfriend's like, what? I'm like, this is an amazing book. This is so good. And, he's like, oh, you said it was over 500 pages. I'm like, it is, but it is so good. And that is the highest compliment I can give you from what I have to do to read. I like to read about 350 a day. So I knew this was going to take me more than a day, but it is worth every page, Brendan. Every page you had me going.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's great to hear. I've heard from a lot of other readers, too, who went in with a little bit of trepidation, most of them relatives of mine who felt right. Required to read, and then once they got in, they felt themselves kind of swept up by it, and it's been great to hear that it's brought people back to big books, and realizing that getting immersed in the story is a really exciting thing.
Absolutely, you do not see big book, not really. I mean, because I don't know, people get scared. Publishing companies don't want to publish more than 350, maybe 400, but and I did feel the same way. But with this book, it really, you bring us into this world that I didn't even want to come out of. Even 560 pages later, I was like, oh, can't we just keep going? Can't Brendan just keep writing more on this book?
That's good to hear. People have asked about, like, oh, is there going to be a sequel? And there's no sequel in the works, but just to know that they still wanted more after spending time with these characters was really, really great to hear.
Yeah, and okay, so I'm huge history buff, everything, everybody knows. I love history. And so going into this book, it takes place, okay, so you're writing so people understand how talented you are. You're writing a 500 plus page book on basically a week, maybe a week and a half period of time. Okay, right. That is not an easy thing to do. I mean, you take us to different places in New York City. It breaks down the days, but I fell in love with these characters. I mean, I really, and not just, yes, it's about the three brothers, but you bring everybody. It's like I get the backstory of there is no peripheral character in this book. The backstory of everybody you're mentioning, and that's not easy to do.
Well, that was an important thing for me for the book, too. There are, and these three brothers are the descent of the Dempsey brothers, who, when I first started the book, were kind of the core of the story, of the action. But as I kept going and thinking about who would they come in contact with and who else is in their lives to know, as those characters came in, those are the ones that became really most fascinating to me in some ways. I wanted to know their stories. Right. And one of the real tasks I set for myself in working on the book was I didn't want a book with a single protagonist. I wanted a book where everybody's story mattered.
Yes.
Because I wanted it to feel like life, where we have things that are happening in our own lives that where we're the star in our own story, but everyone we meet is the central figure in their own lives too, and they might be caught up in ours. They might be tangential players in it, but they have something that's important to them, and I wanted that story to be told too.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have never read a book like this, and because not only did you mention them, but then they get kind of their own chapter, so you know what's going on in their lives, and then all these people's lives just come together into this one story about the World's Fair. And I even hesitate to talk too much about it because I want people to experience it the way I did, and to have it kind of open up the way that I got it to open up for me. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I really did not know much about that time period. I really have to say, like, as much reading as I've done on World War II, as many World War II movies I've seen, recently with that Winston Churchill movie coming out, I've been watching all kinds of Winston Churchill documentaries, and I actually think that the one documentary mentioned that the king and queen had come over to the World's Fair. And so I was like, oh, and then it kind of clicked with me, like, okay, so it's that time. I get it, right before World War II really takes off.
And that became a really fascinating point before, because the 1930s was this fascinating period. And 1939, before the war starts in Europe, it's a different world. I mean, the world changes so dramatically during the war. The world that comes out of the Second World War is not, in so many ways, not at all the world that existed before. And being able to spend time and try to conjure up that one week in June of 1939, the music and the fashion and the politics and the lives of the people living that moment was one of the things that really drove me through through the whole project of the book, trying to make that feel real. But at the same time, it was the intimate stories of the people, of the characters in the book, that kept me going forward. So it was great to listen to tons of big band music and to think about what America was like in that period right before the war started, and to do all this research on the World's Fair and to see old home movies of people going through that space. We could talk more about the fair. It was a weird and fascinating time. But really, it was any opportunity I had to look at oral histories and to hear how people talked, what they cared about, what their stories were, and then to imagine my way into the characters in the book and to think about what would be important to them, what would matter in their lives. That was what really kept me going. I just fell in love with these characters, and I just wanted to find a way to see them through to the end.
Yeah, and that's what I love about, I don't know if you're put into the historical fiction genre, but to me it really was because of everything that you talked about. I learned so much about the music. I don't know, as I get older, I start going back further, music-wise, with jazz and big band. Now I'm like really into big band, and I loved, the fact that this guy was a musician and in New York City in that world. And I don't know, it's just this weird thing with me. It's like I've been listening to 60s music my whole life, and I'm like, oh, let's just keep going back and back.
Right. Well, you see, you listen to, what did they grow up listening to, or what did they build up?
Right. Right.
I went into the book a jazz fan, but not a big band jazz fan. I really liked Zara bebop, and so I was a little concerned about just how much time I'd spend with Benny Goodman and some of the others. But I just Count Basie in particular just knocked me off my feet. I just really listened to tons of Count Basie, and even thought about that thing you mentioned earlier about wanting to give everyone their due in the book. I mean, that's how Count Basie operated. Every musician got a chance to step out and solo. They were all part of the band, but everybody got a chance to shine. And so as I got deeper into the book, I thought about Basie a lot and trying to structure the book the way that Basie orchestrated a song.
Yeah, I remember my grandparents talking about Glenn Miller, And
I
was like, who?
Yeah, right, I know. But anybody who lived through the Second World War, Glenn Miller that music stamped them for life.
Yeah. And so when I was doing the research for this interview, I found out there is an E.B. White essay called The World of Tomorrow. So is that where you got the title from?
Well, I came from the World's Fair. The theme for the World's Fair of 1939 was the world of tomorrow. That was the theme they'd chosen.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things. There's
Okay.
the White Essay, and then a number of other places that reflect on that idea, because it was such the World's Fair was so optimistic. It was a really hopeful view after 10 years of the Depression about what the world was going to look like what America had in store. And it was a place full of skyscrapers and, abundant supermarkets. I mean, they're imagining what the supermarket was going to look like. All these products that would make everyone's life so much better. They imagined this era of great world peace. Part of the World's Fair had a court of nations where they all came together and celebrated the best in themselves. And we see it now when we realize that they were planning this bright future while the shadow of the war is coming closer and closer to them. So the book is set in June, and the World's Fair opens in April, and the war starts in Europe in September. And so right in the middle of that space, here are these characters who are, some of them very aware of what's happening in Europe and what's about to come, and some of them trying really hard to cling to that dream of what the World's Fair offers, this really bright world of tomorrow. Because tomorrow's coming, whether you want it to or not, there's going to be a tomorrow. But the kind of tomorrow it is very much in doubt at that point in 1939.
Yeah, I really didn't know that. I knew so little about the World's Fair. You heard about it, but when I was looking up some of the maps, it kind of took over the city.
Oh, yeah.
It really divided into sections, and it was a really huge, I don't know, it's hard to imagine that here. We heard about it, but I love the fact that, how you brought it into the, this the tension in the book is leading up to the World's Fair, and how these different characters are affected in their lives by it, or not, acting like they're not affected. But really, if you're in New York City at that time, it is affecting you.
Yeah, it's always there, and it kind of forces you to think, as for the characters, and I think for readers too, about the promises that something like the World's Fair made. It promised this bright, abundant world of tomorrow, but it wasn't a promise that was offered to everyone. So there are a couple of African American characters in the novel who know that the life the World's Fair imagines doesn't include them. There's no time made for them. There's no space made for them. And so Elston Hooper, who's a jazz musician in the book, who plays at one of the World's Fair pavilions, there's a moment where he walks through the fair and sort of notices the things around him, but he's also wise to the fact that this is a dream that not everyone gets to share, and one that he even thinks is a little bit corny. But he has dreams of his own that he's hoping to use the World's Fair as a means to an end to get him closer to. So even in that moment, while it's promising all this kind of bright and beautiful and productive tomorrow, there are people even in that moment who know that it's a limited vision.
Yeah. This book has been out since September, so it's 4 months. But are you shocked by how well it's been? It's all over the place. People, when I started to do the research in Entertainment Weekly, Oprah Magazine, how shocked are you by how everybody's loving this book?
It's gratifying. It's so much that you can't control how people are going to read it, who's going to read it, and what they're going to think about it. So, when it came out and there was this great wave of publicity and good feeling, it was rewarding to know that the book was going to get read, because you spend all this time on it, and sometimes you hope for a long time that it's ever going to get finished, and I was certainly in that position for a while. And then once it comes out, you don't know what kind of world it's going to come into. And so it's been great just to see some of the write-ups that it's gotten, to know that it's been read, and then to run into people who've read the book and who've really enjoyed it. People I'm not related to, people that weren't friends of mine.
Yes.
To know that it's sort of out there in the world has been great to see. I'll have friends of mine will send pictures, if they're out visiting somewhere or they live in other parts of the country, I'll get a picture of it on a shelf with a staff pic underneath it. And that's been great, because one thing I've really learned since the book came out, the media coverage has been wonderful, but it's really booksellers that drive what people are reading all around the country. It's the independent bookstores and people who are recommending books and giving it off hand to hand. I was just earlier today up in the local bookstore here in town. We've got a great independent bookstore here in Lenox, Massachusetts, where I live, and was talking to Matt, who owns the store. And in the 10 minutes I was there picking up another book, he hand sold 2 copies of the book to people who just walked in. And he said, "Hey, you want to meet the author? He's right here." And he's, Matt's been doing that from the moment the book came out. And knowing that that's happening in bookstores around the country is just has been great to be connected to that. That's the beating heart of publishing, is what happens in those bookstores. I small in other towns all around the country.
Well, like I said, I mean, you had me. I'm gonna use this line. You had me at hello, because I wrote down your first line. Okay, because I'm telling you, the first line. I'm a first line person. I always read that first line and then I just kind of let it sit and then see how it goes from there. And then when I'm done with the book, I go back and I reread that first page or first paragraph. So I just want to give everybody your first line, because this sets up the story for me. It says, Francis never expected the silverware would be his undoing. And as you get to know Francis, like, that sentence is so amazing. Like, I was like, oh my God, that is, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a first line person. So I love that first line. And did you write it as your first line? Like, did you just know that's how you wanted to start it off?
That was probably one of the last lines I wrote in the book.
Really?
Before we began. Yeah, it was. I tried so many ways into the book. Even I was hundreds of pages in, and I kept coming back to that first paragraph and trying to think about how do I launch this? How do I get started? Because I feel the same way about first lines. For long before I started working on the novel, I wrote short stories, and the first line of the short story really has to grab you. And then I teach as well, and there's so many of these great. Everyone has memorized all these kind of great openings to the 19th century novels.
Yes.
And if I couldn't reach for the truth universally acknowledged, I wanted something. And so there were earlier versions of the first line that were, I don't know, I think they reached a little too far. They were big conceptual kind of grand statements. And I finally just thought, let's just start this thing right in the middle. Let's get into the action. And let's not start at this high narrative level where the narrator's telling us what everyone's thinking, but let's go right to Francis's head. That's where the book starts.
Right.
Where would he be in this moment? And when that line came out, because I just tried to think about, okay, he's sitting at this table, he's surrounded these people, he's an imposter, he's pretending to be someone that he's not, and he looks down and he sees a full service of silverware in front of him, a dozen pieces probably, and he's invested a lot in this identity he's taken on, and suddenly he realizes, like, I don't even know which spoon to choose. And the novel kind of unrolls from that, because a lot of the book, the first half of the book at least, is Francis, who is constantly met with these tests of his new identity, his alibi, and he overcome them, or whether this is the thing that really trips him up and begins his descent. So I thought it would be nice to start with this first test, which he manages to pass, and then let it go from there.
And let it go. Yeah, I mean, I loved it when I first read it, but it meant so much more to me after I read the book to go back and see, like, because you don't remember. You remember it was good, but I'm telling you, as I'm reading this, I knew it was special. I knew this book was special. And then I'm so happy to see that everybody else knows that too. I mean, it's not just me. I mean, your reviews are just amazing. But with your writing style, I mean, you have written short stories, and then you go to writing this, and this is your debut novel, and it's like, how did you do it? Are you an outliner? Did you just sit down? I mean, how long did it take you?
Well, I'm not an outliner. I'm really just a dive in and write kind of person. And with so many voices and so many characters, the book was really going in a lot of directions for a long time. So I would start and I'd work on one of the sections from Francis's point of view, or I'd work from Hooper, who's one of the musicians, or Lily, who's a Czech artist who's in the U.S., who has to go back to Prague, which is now occupied by the Nazis. I'd start from different points, and then I'd try to think about how I was going to pull these all together. And I got to a point where I had a lot of pages written, and I didn't quite have a sense of the order yet, how it was all going to come together. Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I just created. I knew then the book was going to take place over a week. I think I started thinking it would be a few months, 3 or 4 months, and I kept kind of narrowing it. So once I knew it was a week, I created a calendar, and I took all the scenes I'd written, and I dropped them on the calendar, figure out what day they went on. And what I found was that I think I had everything happened on Wednesday, but nothing happened on Thursday. And I kind of looked, okay, that's a really busy Wednesday. Does it all have to happen that day? And I started moving pieces around and trying to figure out, okay, what makes sense, and how does each character's arc build at different moments? Some of them have these high points early in the book, and some a lot later. So that was as close as I ever got to an outline. Was that calendar? But it really gave me a sense. I could start to see the holes and the gaps. Right. And once I laid it all out over a week, and I saw what I didn't have, I knew what was still left for me to write. So that became really a useful way to do it. And I started, I mean, the earliest lines of the book, I mentioned the acknowledgments I wrote in 2009. But really, for the first few years, I was working on short stories primarily, and this book was really a back burner project that I would turn to when I was between stories. So it wasn't until probably the earliest days of 2013 that I really committed to the book. And then it was 4 years until it was done.
Wow. So, I mean,
yeah,
I knew it wasn't going to be like, oh, I wrote it in 4 months and, you know.
Yeah,
Not
no.
Unless you were doing nothing else, you know, there was no way.
Yeah.
But,
to knock out, yeah.
Yeah, and I saw right now you're doing all the book tours, you know, the local places, and what are you thinking about for a next book? Because you said there's no sequel, so are you planning like a next like huge undertaking like this, or what are you thinking?
Well, the next book, I've got a collection of short stories that comes out in February of 2019, so I'm working on those, revising, and a lot of those are stories that have already appeared, but need a little more work. I'd like to come back out again. Some of them have been out, you know, for a few years. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be finishing that up in the next couple of months. And then I've already got some ideas turning for novel number 2, but I do want to set sort of different challenges for myself. I'd like to do something a lot shorter. So the next one I probably will be 300 pages or less. Probably make the publisher happy that way. And I've been trying to think about other things too, about, you know, more contemporary setting something that maybe has only a single narrator, so either a single first person that's driving it or a more limited third person. So some of the things, when I first start thinking about it, the first challenges tend to be more structural or about form. And I found that a lot of my stories kind of grow out of the same thing. There's some idea I'm interested in. I try to think about what the right shape for that story is. So that's sort of where I am with the next thing. I'd like it to be shorter. Shorter would be nice, just because if I could manage to do it, if shorter meant also writing it in a quicker time span, that might be a nice thing for my own mental health. But once I can get into it, we'll see where it goes.
Well, you know what? I love short stories too. I can't wait to see your book on short stories, because there's something to be said about how tight you have to make a story to do a short, you know, I've read a couple of books on short stories, and I'd never done that before. And the more I read them, I'm like, oh, you can get a lot out of a short story. You know, I think it's its own little art form of writing.
It really is. I mean, I think that was one of the things I had to learn coming the other direction from having written short stories to the novel, is that the novel isn't just like a long story, that it really has its own, it moves differently. It rewards different sorts of things. So that, I mean, this is a novel of digressions that goes in a lot of directions very intentionally, and novels allow you to do that. And short stories really don't. You know, you've got to keep it much more tightly wound. The pieces need to fit together. They need to relate to each other in different ways. And you can have lots of different structures, and there's lots of ways of doing that. But I think, you know, you're right. The short story is a more kind of, intricately built machine, which do a lot of work. So it's been nice to turn back to the stories that I've written before, especially with the experience of having just written this long novel, and try to think about where can I compress even more, or where can I try to take some of the things I've learned from the novel and let some of these stories breathe a little more, stretch them out a bit. So that's been nice to try to figure out how much having written the novel helps me on the story, when a lot of what I did with the novel at first was unlearning some of the things that helped me with those stories initially. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, it was so nice talking to you. Can you show everybody the cover again? Because I'm going to have all of your links under here. And I love the cover. Did you get a lot of say on the cover? Because it's beautiful.
No, I didn't. And maybe I'm glad I didn't. I've been told by other writer friends that, you know, they'll show you covers, but they really don't, you know, your feedback, you don't really get to pick. And so I was thrilled when they finally said at Little Brown, you know, here's the cover that Lauren has come up with, Lauren Harms. And I was just bowled over. I mean, that was beautiful. It matches the book really well. And I'll tell you, I'll show you the cover one more time.
Yeah.
There's a skyline scene here of New York, and there's a moment early in the book where Lily is on top of the RCA building, which is now 30 Rock, and she looks out over the city, and that's this view.
That's the view.
So this is a postcard from 1938, and it's the view from the top of the RCA building, and Lauren found it and created this gorgeous cover around it. So it's not only beautiful, but it's actually something a character in the book sees at a crucial moment in the novel. So
Yeah.
how can you go wrong with that?
Yeah, and I go to New York a lot, and it's always interesting. I love looking at old skyline pictures because it changes so much. Even in the year, I'm 53. I've been going for a while, but you constantly go and you see more buildings, and it's just I never get tired of it. As I'm making that drive up to New York City, you just breathtaking from every view. I love every different view around the city, so I was happy to see that view.
Yeah, to see the history of the city and to see how it changes. Buildings come up or go down, and you can just read so much of it. But I was just there yesterday, and walked through Rockefeller Center where that view is and where Lily had been. So it's always, having written so much about it, seeing some of these moments that are in the novel, I sometimes feel like when I catch myself walking in the footsteps of the characters, it's always a special feeling.
I bet. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm so happy to be talking to you during this time period when this book is really, coming out, and all the publicity that you've been getting, and I'm so excited for you, and it is worth it. Everybody, every page of this book is worth it. So thank you so much, Brendan.
Thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Oh, that was great. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Bye-bye. We just got done talking to Brendan, and as you can see, I am having huge lighting issues where I'm sitting, and my son Kyle, who edits these, is going to be so mad at me, but there is really nothing I can do about it. When I started, you guys saw how good it was. It was like a overcast day, and it was perfect, and then as the video went on, it just got worse and worse, and now look at it. I can barely see me. But anyway, I loved him. He was so amazing. Brendan is so talented. What a great debut novel, The World of Tomorrow. I will have all of his links under here. It was, he's in the middle of his book tour. And, little did I know when I started reading it that this book was listed as in the O magazine as one of Oprah's favorite books in 2017. So if that doesn't say anything, I don't know what does. But I didn't know it when I started it. But I am so happy for him. What a great book to start off with. Anyway, guys, thank you. And thank you for putting up with this horrible, horrible lighting on this Saturday afternoon. And we'll talk to you soon.